The moment Madeline Carter stepped into the Astor Ballroom at the Street Regis, she felt something cold settle beneath her ribs. The chandeliers glowed like constellations above Manhattan's elite, casting warm light over polished marble floors and tables dressed in crystal and silver. She had been here 100 times for work, but tonight the air tasted different, sharp, metallic, dangerous. She wasn't supposed to attend this dinner. Brandon, her husband, had told her it was strictly executive, the kind of event where she would feel out of place. She almost believed him, almost. But fate has a cruel way of revealing truth. Across the room, Brandon Carter stood tall in a charcoal suit, his smile wide and performative, the same smile he used when sealing deals he didn't deserve. And clinging to his arm, like a glittering shadow, was a woman Madeline had never seen before. Young, glossy, confident in the way only someone who thinks she has won can be. Madeline froze. The woman laughed, brushing a manicured hand along Brandon's chest, an intimate gesture practiced, familiar. And Brandon didn't move away. He leaned into it, encouraged it. Her heart thudded once, hard. Around them, executives, attorneys, and investors whispered behind raised champagne flutes. They didn't know her yet, they only knew of Brandon's wife, the quiet one he rarely spoke about. To them, she was invisible. Tonight, that invisibility stung more than usual. Madeline steadied herself, fingers tightening around the leather clutch she carried. She reminded herself why she came, not for Brandon, not for appearances, but because something in her gut warned her that this dinner mattered. Brandon spotted her. His smile faltered, just briefly. Then came the smirk, the one he used when he believed he held all the power. He wrapped his arm tighter around the mistress, as if presenting her. And then, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, he said, "Madeline, what are you doing here? This event is above your level." The room fell silent. Madeline lifted her chin. Because what Brandon didn't know, what no one in this room knew, was that tonight she wasn't here as his forgotten wife. She was here as something much, much more. And she was about to prove it. Long before she became the woman standing alone in a ballroom full of strangers, Madeline Carter had been the kind of wife people described as devoted, supportive, the quiet force behind her husband's rise. She grew up in a modest suburb outside Boston, raised by a schoolteacher mother who taught her that kindness was a currency more valuable than gold. But kindness could also become a weapon, especially in the wrong marriage. When Madeline met Brandon 12 years earlier, he was ambitious, charming, brilliantly persuasive. He made her feel seen in a world where she often faded into the background. He told her she was the smartest woman he'd ever met. He said he wanted a partner, not a shadow. She believed him. Back then, they would cook simple dinners together in their tiny apartment, laugh until midnight, and dream about a future built on love and teamwork. But somewhere along the way, maybe after his first promotion, maybe after the money started flowing, maybe after she miscarried their first child, something shifted. The man who once praised her began critiquing every choice she made. "You don't understand how business works. Just let me handle the important decisions. You overthink everything. That's why you're not progressing." The words were small cuts at first, then deeper wounds she learned to hide. He began traveling more, coming home later, speaking to her like an inconvenience. She tried harder cooking his favorite meals, leaving encouraging notes in his briefcase, attending every corporate event with a polite smile even when her heart ached. But nothing softened him. Instead, he grew more dismissive. The worst part wasn't the coldness, it was the control. Brandon insisted on managing their finances, claiming it was easier that way. He monitored her spending, discouraged her from taking bigger roles in her field, and slowly pushed her into a smaller and smaller life. A life that revolved entirely around his success. And Madeline, still healing from the child they lost, convinced herself it was temporary, that he would come back to who he used to be. That love could survive ambition, but ambition had swallowed him whole. He began staying late at the office. He guarded his phone. He smelled like perfume she didn't own. When she asked gentle questions, he called her insecure, paranoid, overreacting. And tonight, seeing him with the woman he replaced her with confirmed what her heart had known long before her mind could accept it. The man she married was gone. And as Madeline forced her breath to steady, she remembered something Brandon had forgotten. She was not a woman built to break. And someone in this ballroom was about to remind him of that. Madeline had endured humiliation before quiet dismissals, backhanded remarks, the slow erosion of affection, but nothing prepared her for the moment. Brandon's mistress stepped forward, with a polished smile that gleamed like a blade. The young woman extended a hand as if greeting a stranger at a networking event. "I'm Brielle," she said sweetly, her voice carrying the sugary sharpness of someone who enjoyed being watched. "Brandon's been telling me so much about you." Madeline hesitated. Brielle's hand lingered in the air, demanding acknowledgement. Out of politeness or habit, Madeline took it. Brielle's grip tightened, nails grazing Madeline's skin in a way that felt intentional. "You're his wife, right?" Brielle tilted her head with an innocent smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Wow, you're not at all what I pictured." A few nearby guests glanced over, sensing the tension. Brielle thrived under the attention. She stepped slightly closer to Brandon, looping her arm through his as though she were claiming territory. "I told Brandon earlier that you probably wouldn't come tonight," she continued. "Events like this can be a bit overwhelming for someone who doesn't work in high-level finance." Madeline felt her jaw tighten. Brandon pretended to clear his throat, but the smirk tugging at his mouth showed he enjoyed the spectacle. "She means well," he murmured, patting Brielle's hand. "Madeline's more comfortable with simpler environments." Simpler. The word landed like a slap, though Madeline kept her expression steady. She had learned long ago that pride, when held quietly, had its own kind of strength. But Brielle wasn't finished. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice to a faux whisper. "I hope you don't mind that I'm here tonight. Brandon said this dinner was too stressful for you, and honestly, I get it. These rooms are full of sharks. You have to really know the industry to belong." Madeline could have laughed at the irony. She had built models, assessed mergers, and executed risk projections long before Brandon learned how to read a balance sheet. But she swallowed her anger. Tonight was not the night to explain herself to a child playing at power. Not yet. Brielle's gaze swept Madeline's outfit, a classic black dress, understated jewelry, minimal makeup, and she nodded sympathetically. "Next time, if you want, I can help you with styling. Investors notice everything, especially at elite events." A few guests swallowed their gasps. Brandon didn't defend his wife. He didn't even pretend to. Madeline inhaled slowly, letting the sting settle not as pain, but as clarity. The more they underestimated her, the more powerful the truth would strike. Brielle gave one last satisfied smile. "It must be hard," she said softly, "watching someone like me stand where you used to stand." Into. Madeline finally lifted her eyes, calm and steady. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, "you have no idea where I stand." For a moment after Brielle's final jab, the world around Madeline dimmed, not in the dramatic way people describe heartbreak, but in the subtle, suffocating way a room feels when all the oxygen is slowly drained from it. Laughter echoed around her, glasses clinked, forks scraped porcelain plates, yet every sound seemed distant, muted, as if she were trapped behind a pane of glass. She'd always wondered what the breaking point of a woman looked like. Turns out, it wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was quiet, terrifyingly quiet. She stood there, shoulders straight, spine perfectly aligned, the picture of poise. But inside, memories folded over her like heavy curtains. The nights she waited for Brandon to come home, the holidays he spent traveling. The doctor's visit where she learned their baby no longer had a heartbeat, and she'd had to go through it alone because Brandon was in a critical meeting. He never asked how she survived that day. He never asked anything. Madeline swallowed hard, keeping her eyes steady. She would not cry here, not in a room full of people who didn't know her, not in front of the man who took everything tender inside her and used it against her. A server passed by with a tray of champagne. Her fingers trembled as she reached for a glass, not from weakness, but from restraint. A small sip burned down her throat, steadying her heartbeat. Across the room, guests watched her the way people watch a glass figurine moments before it slips off the shelf. Some with pity, some with curiosity, none understanding that she wasn't fragile. She was simply finally done. Brandon leaned in, speaking softly but with a sting sharp enough to bruise. "Madeline, stop making this awkward. Just take a seat somewhere in the back. Investors are arriving soon." He didn't even lower his voice enough. Brielle laughed lightly. "Yes, you don't want to embarrass yourself." Or Brandon. Embarrass herself. The irony nearly made Madeline laugh, but she stayed still. every muscle held in an elegant, controlled line. There was power in not reacting, a kind of dignity they didn't have the range to comprehend. A soft melody from the ballroom's string quartet floated through the tension. Madeline closed her eyes briefly, allowing the music to anchor her, to remind her of the truth beneath her silence. She had survived worse than this room. She had walked through pain deeper than anything these two could imagine. And tonight, she hadn't come here to crumble. Somewhere behind the crowd, a door opened. A voice announced the arrival of an important guest. Madeline lifted her chin, because the moment she'd been waiting for was finally here. Brandon thrived under chandeliers. It was the same everywhere they went. Give him a spotlight, a glass of aged whiskey, and an audience wearing tailored suits, and he transformed into the man he always wished he was. Confident, important, untouchable. Tonight, with Brielle glued to his arm like a designer accessory, he was performing at his peak. As the cluster of executives tightened around him, Brandon raised his voice just enough to carry across the room. So yes, gentlemen, the projections are strong. We're anticipating a major capital injection soon. A serious investor, the kind of person who actually understands scale. He threw a pointed glance at Madeline. A few men followed his gaze. Their expressions flickered with polite confusion. None of them knew who she was yet, but Brandon's message was clear. She didn't belong. He continued, I told the board that we can't keep operating with dead weight. We need people with vision. People who know the industry, not amateurs. Brielle giggled, leaning her head on his shoulder like she was listening to the funniest joke at the Met Gala. You're too much, she purred. But you're right. Madeline didn't flinch. She simply watched, studying him the way a meteorologist studies a predictable storm. One executive, a gray-haired man with a Mont Blanc clipped to his pocket, finally asked, Brandon, is your wife not involved in the business side at all? Brandon scoffed, waving the concern away as if swatting a fly. Madeline? She's domestic. She takes care of the house, dabbles in small projects. Finance isn't really her world. A few guests exchanged looks. Really? The man pressed. I thought I'd heard she had a background in risk analysis. Brandon laughed loud enough to startle nearby tables. A certificate class at a community college doesn't make someone an expert. She's good at cooking and organizing closets. That's her lane. Madeline's chest tightened not from hurt, but from the sheer audacity of his ignorance. If only he knew. Brielle added, Besides, real investors want strong decision-makers. People like Brandon, not emotional types. Emotional. The irony was suffocating. As Brandon launched into another monologue about market expansion, a monologue full of errors Madeline could correct in seconds, she noticed executives beginning to lose interest. Their eyes drifted toward the ballroom entrance, where whispers rippled like wind through tall grass. Someone important had arrived. Someone they had all been waiting for. Brandon kept talking, oblivious, confident the night belonged to him. But the ballroom door was about to open. And everything Brandon bragged about was about to collapse around him. Because the true investor had just stepped into the building. The ballroom door opened with a soft, commanding hiss, the kind of sound that made people turn even before they understood why. Conversations paused, glasses stilled midair. Even the orchestra seemed to play just a touch quieter, as if sensing the shift. Adrian Vaughn had arrived. Tall, composed, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, he walked with a quiet authority that didn't need applause or theatrics. Adrian wasn't loud. He wasn't showy. But power radiated from him like heat from a furnace, steady, controlled, undeniable. Executives straightened. Investors whispered. A few assistants scrambled to adjust their posture. Even Brandon's monologue faltered. Because everyone in the New York finance circle knew one thing. Where Adrian Vaughn appeared, money followed. Brandon nudged Brielle. That's the CEO of Vaughn Equity Partners, he whispered urgently. He runs one of the top-performing funds in the country. If he's here, it means something big is happening. Brielle widened her eyes, starstruck. Oh my God, maybe he's the investor you've been talking about. Really came. Brandon squared his shoulders, attempting to appear taller, more polished, more relevant. It could be, he murmured with a self-satisfied smirk. I told you, baby. Big players respect big vision. Madeline knew better. Adrian Vaughn never attended public dinners unless the deal was significant or personal. And tonight, it was both. Their eyes met across the ballroom, his steady, hers guarded. There was no romantic history, no scandalous past. But Adrian had always respected Madeline in ways her husband never bothered to. Years ago, when Brandon dismissed one of her financial models as cute, Adrian was the only one who called it brilliant. He'd always seen her mind, her value, her potential. He walked toward the center of the room, executives parting instinctively to make space. Brandon puffed out his chest, positioning himself directly in Adrian's path, like a contestant auditioning for approval. "Adrian," Brandon said, extending his hand with exaggerated confidence, "you found us. I had a feeling you'd be joining the table tonight." Adrian looked at the hand, looked at Brandon. Then, without a word, he looked past him, straight at Madeline. The air crackled. Madeline didn't move, but something in her posture shifted, a subtle reclaiming of space, of worth, of power. Adrian nodded once, an acknowledgement heavy with meaning. Brandon blinked, thrown off balance. "You two? Know each other?" Adrian finally spoke, voice smooth and unmistakably intentional. "I go where the right people are, Brandon." Brielle giggled nervously. "Well, you're standing with the right ones now." Adrian smiled faintly. "No," he replied, "not yet." He took another step, toward Madeline, and the entire room turned to see who he was walking to. A ripple of anticipation moved through the ballroom as servers began rearranging tables, placing embossed name cards at the head seat of the long oak table reserved for the evening's most important guest. It was subtle, but everyone who understood the hierarchy of corporate events recognized the shift. This wasn't a simple dinner anymore. This was the moment the room had been waiting for. "The lead investor should be here any minute," someone whispered, clutching a portfolio. "Do we know who it is?" another murmured. Vaughn wouldn't show up unless the investor was legitimately high profile. Executives leaned in, guessing names like children trading secrets. Maybe a hedge fund billionaire. Or that West Coast tech magnate? No, someone said it's a private investor. Anonymous, but powerful. Brandon nearly vibrated with excitement. He straightened his tie, glanced at his reflection in a polished silver platter a server carried by, and whispered to Brielle, "This is it. Whoever the investor is, they'll want someone with my vision, guiding the ship." Brielle beamed as if she'd helped build the company herself. "You'll charm them. Investors love you." Madeline almost laughed. It was astounding how much confidence could fit inside a man who had accomplished so little without stepping on others. Board members began gathering near the front. Even the CFO, who rarely left his seat at these events, rose to adjust the seating chart. There was a hum in the air, a steady buzz of speculation. "Brandon," the CFO called out, "you'll want to be up front. You'll likely be introducing yourself early." Brandon swelled with pride. "Of course, they'll want someone who represents the company." He cast a smug glance at Madeline, silently reminding her she had no place in this conversation. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. A tall coordinator approached the microphone, clearing her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Our distinguished investor has requested a brief delay as they finalize additional documentation with Mr. Vaughn." Brandon whispered, "See? They're meeting with Adrian first. That means they're huge." It meant something, yes, but not what he thought. "When they arrive," the coordinator continued, "we ask that everyone give them a warm welcome. Their contribution will significantly influence the direction of Carter Dynamics." Guests clapped politely. Brandon clapped louder. Madeline stood still, expression unreadable, though her pulse beat calmly beneath her skin. She knew exactly how the next hour would unfold, knew the tidal wave that was about to wash over this room. She had waited years for this moment, silently, patiently, painfully. Next to her, Brandon smoothed his jacket, preparing to greet the investor he believed would secure his future. But the future didn't belong to him, because very soon the doors would open. And the name on that golden place card, the one everyone in the room whispered about, would belong to someone they least expected. Someone Brandon had underestimated his entire life. The lights softened as the coordinator lifted the microphone again. Conversations tapered into quiet anticipation, and the air thickened with the kind of tension usually reserved for court verdicts or election nights. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "our lead investor has arrived." Every head turned toward the double doors at the end of the ballroom. Every head except Madeline's. She already knew. The doors opened with a gentle, elegant swing. A figure stepped inside, not with the swagger of someone hungry for admiration, but with the steady calm of someone who had nothing to prove. Madeline Carter. For a moment, no one reacted. It was as if the entire room blinked at the same time, unsure of what they were seeing. Then whispers burst like sparks. Is that Brandon's wife? She's the investor? Impossible. No, Adrian Vaughn is walking beside her. Look, look. One stutter. Because yes, Adrian was at her side, his expression composed, his posture intentionally deferential. He wasn't leading her. He was accompanying her. Brandon froze, jaw slack, eyes wide with disbelief, so raw it was almost comical. Brielle clutched his arm, confused. Wait, why is she walking with Adrian? Is she working for him? Working for him. If only the girl knew. The coordinator continued, Please welcome Miss Madeline Carter, primary financial partner for tonight's agreement. Oh, no. And Frest. And for. A wave of shock rolled through the audience. Chairs scraped. People straightened. Even the CFO, who rarely showed emotion, nearly choked on his drink. Madeline walked with quiet grace to the head of the table, her heels clicking softly on the marble, each sound a declaration that the world they thought they knew was no longer real. Brandon stumbled forward. Maddie, wait. What is this? Why didn't you tell me? She looked at him with a calmness sharpened by months, years of being dismissed. You never asked, she replied, voice steady. But you're not an investor, he insisted, desperation creeping in. You're not trained for this. You don't understand this world. Madeline raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? Adrian stepped forward, his tone crisp. Brandon, Madeline's analysis reports have been guiding multi-million-dollar portfolios for years. Many of us in this room have relied on her insight long before you even knew what a risk model was. Gasps rippled across the table. Madeline did not smile. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was the correction to every lie Brandon had ever spoken about her. She picked up the golden name card placed at the head seat, her seat, and set it gently on the table. Brandon's face paled, because now he understood. This wasn't humiliation. This was revelation. And the night had only just begun. Silence clung to the room like fog. The shock of Madeline taking the investor's seat hadn't faded. If anything, it grew heavier as the truth settled into everyone's bones. Executives who had ignored her earlier now stared at her with newfound respect, some even with fear. Brandon, meanwhile, looked like the floor had opened beneath him. He forced a laugh, brittle and panicked. Okay, Maddie. Funny joke, really. You had everyone going for a moment. Today's Oroso. No one laughed with him. Adrian slid a document folder across the table. This is no joke, Brandon. Madeline authorized the capital agreement 2 hours ago. Vaughn Equity is partnering with her fund for a full acquisition review of Carter Dynamics. The CFO blinked rapidly. A review? As in restructuring? Restructuring, Adrian confirmed. Starting with leadership performance. A murmur spread, short, sharp, electric. Brandon's voice cracked. You can't just review me. I run this company. Madeline looked up, her gaze steady. You run it into debt. The CFO grimaced. A board member coughed into his hand. Someone else muttered, She's not wrong. Brandon's face reddened. And what qualifies you to question my leadership? The question hung in the air like a challenge no one expected her to answer. But she did. Calmly. Factually. Devastatingly. For 3 years, I've been reviewing Carter Dynamics financial statements after you left them lying around the house. Your revenue models don't match your expense reports. Your staffing allocations contradict your merger projections. Your debt-to-equity ratio is unstable because you inflated projected market expansion without accounting for risk exposure. Heads turned. Eyes widened. A few people actually whispered, Holy shit. Madeline continued. Your investors think the company can survive on charm and hope, but charm doesn't correct insolvency and hope doesn't replace competence. Adrian added, She's right. And the board will see the full picture tomorrow morning. Tomorrow? Brandon choked. You scheduled a meeting without telling me? You weren't supposed to know. Adrian replied. The color drained from Brandon's face. Then, as if remembering Brielle beside him, he straightened and sneered. You're doing all this because you're emotional. You're embarrassed. I moved on. This is revenge. Madeline's voice softened, not with weakness, but with truth sharpened by betrayal. This isn't revenge, Brandon. This is accountability. A hush fell over the table. And then the CFO spoke, carefully, formally. Mrs. Carter, do you intend to evaluate the COO position as part of this review? Brandon's breath hitched. Madeline folded her hands. Of course, she said. That's where we begin. If Brandon looked shaken, Brielle looked petrified. Moments earlier, she stood tall beside him, smiling like a queen crowned at the wrong pageant. Now she seemed smaller, shoulders tense, eyes darting as though searching for an exit. The confidence she weaponized against Madeline had evaporated the moment the room acknowledged the real hierarchy. She was no longer the glittering accessory. She was collateral. Board members whispered. Some pointed. One even frowned with recognition. Adrian, sensing the shift, tapped a stack of printed reports. Before we proceed, Mrs. Carter, there's one more issue we should address. A matter of internal security. Madeline nodded, though she already knew where this was going. She had suspected for weeks. Tonight was simply the stage. Brandon scoffed. Security? This isn't the time, Adrian. Oh, I think it's exactly the time, Adrian replied. Especially when confidential data has been leaking to a competitor. A sharp inhale rippled through the table. Brandon's brows snapped together. Leaking? From who? Adrian turned a page. Digital tracing identified an unauthorized device accessing sensitive files from your office. The IP address matched the network used by an individual associated with Carter Dynamics, but not an employee. The room's attention shifted to Brielle, so suddenly she flinched. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered. I've never touched anything confidential. Adrian raised a brow. Then why did your name appear on multiple guest logs? Why were you in and out of the executive floor without clearance? Brandon stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Brielle, what did you do? She shook her head frantically. Brandon, no, I was visiting you. You said it was fine. But Adrian continued, unbothered by the panic unraveling beside him. Mr. Hale, your competitor didn't receive those documents by accident. Someone handed them over. And they were paid for it. Paper slid across the table, a printed Venmo transfer screen. Labeled Consulting. Sent from the rival firm. To Brielle. Madeline watched quietly as the color drained from the mistress's face. The woman who had mocked her moments earlier now trembled like a frightened child. Brandon erupted. You sold company data? Are you insane? I needed the money, she cried. And you promised. You said you'd take care of me. Silence landed like a punch. Executives exchanged glances of disgust. The CFO whispered, we could be liable for this. Madeline finally spoke, calm and unshaken. This is what happens when personal decisions become professional liabilities. Brielle's lip trembled. Madeline, I didn't mean. Madeline looked at her with a mercy that wasn't softness, it was judgment. Intentions don't erase consequences. As friends. Adrian closed the folder. Mrs. Carter, shall we move forward with disciplinary recommendations? Madeline nodded once. Start with both of them. If the room had been stunned before, now it was suffocating under the weight of everything unraveling at once. The revelation about Brielle had shaken the investors, but what came next threatened to destroy Brandon entirely. The CFO cleared his throat, voice tight. Before we proceed, there's an urgent financial discrepancy that requires Miss Carter's attention. Brandon stiffened. What discrepancy? I review all financials myself. That's the problem, the CFO said quietly. He pulled out a folder thick with spreadsheets, charts, and emails. The kind of paperwork that didn't lie. Over the last 18 months, he explained, our operational expenses have ballooned without reasonable explanation. Travel costs, client entertainment, unapproved vendor contracts, all authorized under your login. Brandon waved a dismissive hand. Those were business necessities. But the CFO didn't relent. Private jet rentals to Los Angeles, 5-star hotel suites in Miami, jewelry purchases labeled as client retention. These are not business expenses. Gasps echoed, louder this time. Madeline stayed silent, letting the truth peel him open, layer by layer. Adrian leaned in, voice clipped. Brandon, your department is running at a loss because you've drained funds to cover your personal lifestyle. Es furs. That's not, Brandon sputtered. That's not true. I had to entertain clients. Those trips were strategically planned. Strategic? Adrian flipped to another page. There are receipts showing you booked rooms for 2. Multiple times. Brielle's head snapped toward him, betrayal slicing her expression. You took other women too? Brandon paled. Brielle, stop. This isn't about— Oh, but it is, a board member interrupted. If the COO is funneling company money into personal relationships, that's grounds for immediate suspension. Brandon's grip on the back of his chair tightened until his knuckles turned white. I am the backbone of this company. You need me. Madeline finally spoke, her voice soft but unyielding. A backbone supports. It doesn't drain. He turned on her with desperation in his eyes. Madeline, please listen. These men don't understand the pressure I've been under. You know me. You know I'm trying. Her gaze didn't waver. Trying isn't the same as leading. The CFO added one final blow. And there's more. Your projected revenue pitch for Q4, the one you sent to shareholders, it was fabricated. We ran the numbers. They were impossible. The room inhaled sharply because leaders could make mistakes. Yes. But falsifying projections? That was unforgivable. For the first time, Brandon looked genuinely afraid, not angry, not arrogant, just scared. Like a man watching the walls close in on a room he lit on fire himself. He reached for the table to steady himself. Madeline, he whispered, voice cracking, you can fix this. Help me. She looked at him, not with cruelty, but with clarity. I will, she said, but not in the way you think. For years, Madeline had shielded Brandon from the worst consequences of his impulsive decisions. She had corrected his errors quietly, covered gaps in his reports, even whispered last-minute advice before his presentations. She did it because she believed in the marriage, believed people could grow, believed loyalty meant something. But loyalty without respect was servitude. And tonight was the night she stopped serving. She rose from her chair, not dramatically, not boastfully, but with the calm precision of someone who had carried the truth far too long. Allow me to clarify, she said, her voice steady yet resonant. Carter Dynamics' current crisis didn't begin 18 months ago. It began 5 years ago. Executives exchanged startled looks. Brandon blinked. 5 years? What are you? Madeline opened a folder of her own. No one knew she had brought one. She placed it on the table and slid out several documents. Early projections, compliance warnings, and discrepancies from Brandon's earliest years as COO. Adrian's brow lifted. He hadn't seen these, either. These are your reports, Madeline continued. The ones you told investors were flawless, but the math was off even then. Revenue predictions inflated, partner contracts mishandled, talent retention ignored. A board member leaned forward. You compiled all of this? Madeline nodded. Someone had to. Brandon's voice cracked. Maddie, why didn't you tell me? She met his eyes she once believed held her future. I tried. You told me I didn't understand business. You told me to leave corporate matters to you. The CFO exhaled slowly. This explains everything. These early missteps snowballed into the operational failures we're facing now. The humiliation on Brandon's face curdled into something darker, fear mixed with denial. You're twisting this. You're angry. You're making me look incompetent. Madeline didn't even blink. You did that yourself. End quote. She pulled out one last item, a compliance notice from 3 years ago that Brandon had ignored, one that warned the company of legal consequences if certain data practices weren't corrected. Had this been addressed, Madeline said softly, the company wouldn't be under federal review today. The gasp that moved through the room was visceral. Brandon stumbled back. Federal review? No, no, no. They said it was just routine. They lied to protect the company from collapse, the CFO said. But with tonight's revelations, we're out of time. Brandon turned to Madeline, trembling. You're supposed to be on my side. She looked at him with a clarity that cut clean through years of pain. I was on your side. You were never on mine. Adrian stepped beside her, his voice authoritative. Mrs. Carter, I believe it's time we discuss leadership transition. Brandon's knees nearly buckled. Madeline inhaled slowly and prepared to say the words that would end him. For a long moment, no one moved. Brandon stood frozen, breathing shallowly as if a single inhale might shatter him completely. Madeline remained standing, calm and composed, her folder still open in front of her like a quiet executioner's blade. Then Adrian spoke. Mrs. Carter, You mentioned earlier that this problem began years ago. If there is additional documentation supporting misconduct, now is the time." End quote. Madeline hesitated, not because she feared the backlash, but because this part hurt far more than the financial failures. It was proof of something deeper, betrayal layered beneath betrayal. She carefully withdrew a small flash drive from her clutch. Simple, unassuming, yet powerful enough to silence a room of titans. "This," she said softly, "contains internal emails and recorded meetings from the past 2 years." A board member stiffened. "Recorded?" Madeline nodded. "Every time Brandon told me I didn't understand. Every time he claimed the board was aligned with his numbers. Every time he dismissed compliance warnings, he left a trail." Brielle gasped. Brandon's face turned an alarming shade of red. Adrian inserted the drive into the laptop connected to the ballroom display. A large screen flickered to life, illuminating Brandon's future in harsh white light. The first file opened. An email from Brandon to a junior analyst. "Inflate the projection by 12%. Investors respond better to upward curves. They won't question it." Gasps filled the room. The second, a recorded video call. A compliance officer warned him, voice urgent. "If you continue manipulating data, Brandon, the company may be flagged. This is illegal." Brandon's reply played aloud. "Relax. No one checks that deeply. And my wife thinks everything I do is brilliant anyway." End quote. End quote. I-470, I think that Javi Wad. Madeline closed her eyes briefly. She remembered hearing that line through the wall once, thinking she'd misheard. She hadn't. The third file was worse. A voice memo Brandon left for himself, probably after a night of heavy drinking. "I have to keep things hidden from Maddie," she worries. "If she knew the truth about the company's finances, she'd panic. Better to keep her out. She's too soft for corporate reality." Soft. A word he weaponized like a blade. The CFO stood abruptly. "This is grounds for immediate termination." A board member added, "and possibly civil action." Brandon stumbled backward, shaking his head violently. No, you don't understand. I was protecting the company. I was protecting all of us. Maddie, tell them I'm not the villain here." Madeline looked at him not with rage, but with the finality of someone who had finally reached the end of what her heart could forgive. "You weren't protecting me," she said quietly. "You were using me." Brandon's voice broke. "Maddie, please." But the room had already shifted. His power had evaporated. His allies had turned away. And then the CFO delivered the final blow. Effective immediately, Brandon Carter is suspended pending full investigation. And that was the moment Brandon realized he had truly lost everything. The declaration of Brandon's suspension hit the ballroom like a thunderclap. In a space built for elegance, crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, polished marble, the moment felt brutal, raw, almost primitive. Power was shifting in real time, and no one could pretend not to see it. Brandon stood frozen, shoulders sagging, suit rumpled, as though the weight of every lie he'd built his career on was now crushing him. Moments ago, he had stood tall, bragging about his brilliance. Now he looked like a man stripped of armor, exposed under the harshest light imaginable. I gave everything to this company," he stammered. "You all depended on me." A board member, a stern woman with steel-gray eyes, responded coldly, "We depended on the numbers you provided, numbers you manipulated." "And jeopardized," another added. "And lied about," came a third voice. The murmurs intensified, rippling outward like a wave through the crowd. Some whispered in disbelief, others nodded, as if pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. Brandon's gaze darted frantically from face to face, searching for even one ally. But the truth was easy to spot now. His confidence had always been louder than his competence. And his downfall, as it turned out, was not only predictable but inevitable. He turned desperately to Brielle. You have to say something. Tell them I didn't do this alone. Tell them." But Brielle backed away, eyes wide, as if he were a sinking ship dragging anything nearby into the depths. "I'm not going down with you," she whispered, voice trembling. "I didn't know you were this reckless." Brandon let out a choked sound, half laugh, half cry. "Of course you knew. You benefited from it." Her silence was her answer. He turned next to Adrian, the man he once hoped to impress. "Adrian, you've worked with me for years. Tell them I'm not incompetent." Adrian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Brandon, you sabotaged your own future long before tonight. You stopped listening. You stopped learning. And you stopped respecting the people who tried to help you. The truth landed harder than any accusation. Brandon swayed, gripping the back of a chair to steady himself. Madeline, he whispered, voice barely holding together, you can fix this, please. I know you still care. Madeline looked at him, the man she once promised to love through better or worse. And yet, this worse was not life's cruelty. It was his choice. I cared, she said gently, long after you stopped deserving it. The board chairwoman stepped forward with finality. Security will escort Mr. Carter from the premises, effective immediately. Gasps echoed as two guards approached. Brandon staggered back. No, you can't do this. This is my company. But the truth was undeniable. It had never been his. And as security reached for him, Madeline turned toward the board, ready to take the next step in dismantling everything he once controlled. The ballroom felt transformed. Where chaos had erupted minutes earlier, a new kind of order emerged, sharp, focused, and undeniably centered around one person, Madeline Carter. Security escorted Brandon out, his protests fading into the hallway. The moment the doors shut behind him, the room exhaled. Executives shifted uneasily, realizing the company's future. Their future rested on the woman he had so carelessly underestimated. Adrian took a step closer to Madeline, his tone measured but carrying a weight that demanded attention. Mrs. Carter, he began, with Brandon suspended, the company is exposed. If we don't act decisively, we could lose major partners before morning. The CFO nodded. Investors will panic unless we establish immediate leadership. Takes 4, end of validity. Another board member added, we need stability and, frankly, competence. All eyes turned to Madeline. For the first time all night, she felt every gaze settle not on her as an accessory, not as a spouse in the shadows, but as the most capable person in the room. Adrian clasped his hands behind his back, as if preparing to present a formal proposal. I've reviewed your models, your assessments, your forecasts. If Carter Dynamics is going to survive this restructuring, we need someone who understands the numbers and the people behind them. Madeline listened quietly, unsure of where he was going, but the warmth in his voice was unmistakable. We need you, he said. A subtle shock moved across the table. A few executives straightened. One even whispered, she'd be perfect. Madeline blinked. You want me to consult? Adrian held her gaze. No. I want you to assume an executive advisory role through the restructuring. And, if you choose, take interim control of operations. The CFO chimed in immediately. I support that. So do I, said a board member. And I, added another. Support spread like wildfire. Brielle watched from the corner, forgotten, paling with each passing second. Madeline's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the surreal clarity of the moment. For years she had been the invisible problem solver, the quiet strategist behind closed doors. Now she was being asked openly, formally, to take command. She glanced at Brandon's empty chair. Once a symbol of authority, now a monument to arrogance. Adrian leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Madeline, the company needs a leader with integrity, someone who doesn't chase power but earns it, someone who has already saved this company more times than anyone realizes. Einem. His words settled deep in her chest. She breathed in, steady and calm. Before I answer, she said softly, there's one condition. The board leaned in. Adrian's eyes sparked with interest. What condition? He asked. Madeline looked around the room at the executives who dismissed her, the mistress who mocked her, the empire her husband nearly destroyed. Then she spoke with quiet authority. If I take this role, the restructuring must begin at the top. One first. The boardroom energy shifted again, this time not with panic nor chaos, but with sharp, focused anticipation. Every executive leaned in, waiting for Madeline's condition to be spoken aloud, as though her words were the key to unlocking the company's future. The restructuring must begin at the top, she repeated, her voice steady as glass. The CFO nodded gravely. You mean removing Brandon permanently? No, Madeline replied. I mean removing his entire framework, every department he built, every unofficial hierarchy he allowed, every culture of fear he created. A hum of agreement spread around the table. Brandon hadn't just mismanaged numbers. He'd mismanaged people, belittling junior analysts, rewarding those who flattered him, silencing those who questioned his decisions. If Carter Dynamics was going to survive, the rot had to be cut clean. Adrian stepped closer, hands clasped behind his back. Madeline, if you take interim operational control, you will have full authority to restructure as you see fit. I'll endorse it publicly. The board will follow. Several heads nodded immediately. A senior board member added, "Frankly, Mrs. Carter, with all due respect, you're the only one who's shown true leadership tonight." For a moment, Madeline felt something unexpected rising in her chest. Not pride, not triumph, but release. Years of silent resilience, years of swallowing her brilliance, years of being told she wasn't enough, were dissolving under the weight of recognition she never asked for but always deserved. She took a slow breath. "Very well," she said. "I accept the position. Effective immediately." The words landed like a spark in dry timber. The board erupted with motion papers sliding, executives straightening, assistants taking notes at frantic speed. Power didn't shift slowly tonight. It snapped into place like a switch being thrown. Brielle sank into her chair, staring blankly at the tablecloth. She finally understood the magnitude of the world she'd tried to claw her way into and the woman she'd foolishly provoked. Adrian allowed a small, knowing smile to touch his lips. Not gloating, not proud, respectful. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "there's one more matter before we formalize your role. If you factory." He pulled out a sealed envelope, thicker than most, embossed with a familiar insignia, Carter Dynamics founding crest. "This was delivered earlier today," he explained. "It contains the last outstanding portion of private shares in the company." Madeline frowned slightly. "I wasn't aware of outstanding shares." "You weren't supposed to be," the CFO said quietly. "They belonged to your late father-in-law." A murmur rippled. Adrian placed the envelope directly in front of her. "And they were transferred to you." Madeline's breath caught. If the papers were what he implied, she wasn't just interim leadership. She was majority control. Her hands hovered over the envelope. Then she opened it, and the room gasped at what was inside. The documents inside the envelope were thick, stamped, and undeniably final. The crest of Carter Dynamics gleamed at the top, an emblem that had once symbolized Brandon's lifelong dream. Now, that dream sat in Madeline's hands. She scanned the pages swiftly, yet carefully. The room held its breath. At the bottom of the final sheet, the truth crystallized. Her late father-in-law had transferred his shares to her, not Brandon, nearly a decade earlier. Adrian spoke softly, but every word landed like a hammer. "Mr. Carter's father believed in you, not him. He stipulated that the shares would pass to the family member most capable of safeguarding the company's future." He paused. "That was you." "It's Manistom." A shockwave ran through the table. Madeline felt something profound rise in her chest, vindication, sorrow, and an ache for the man who had seen her worth long before she dared to claim it herself. Meanwhile, down the hall, Brandon was still arguing with security. "Get your hands off me. I built this place. This is my company." His voice echoed, distorted by desperation. The door burst open as security escorted him back in for required formalities. He stumbled inside, disheveled, still clinging to the fantasy that he had leverage. "Madeline," he growled, "tell them this is a misunderstanding. You know my father wanted me to take over. You know that." Madeline held up the signed transfer documents. "This," she said evenly, "is what he wanted." Brandon froze mid-breath. His eyes scanned the papers once, twice, again, until color drained from his face entirely. He sank into a chair, hands trembling violently. "No, no, he would never leave it to you. You were just—" He couldn't finish. Just the wife. Just the quiet one. Just the shadow. Just the woman he thought he owned. Madeline closed the folder. "He trusted me because I listened, because I studied, because I cared about the company, not the image." Board members exchanged solemn nods. Adrian stepped forward. "Effective immediately, Mrs. Carter is majority shareholder. Her decisions supersede all existing leadership." "If we know." Brandon let out a broken laugh. "So that's it? You're taking everything from me?" Madeline met his eyes, no malice, only truth. "I'm not taking anything. You gave it away piece by piece every time you lied, every time you underestimated me, every time you chose ambition over integrity." He shook his head wildly, tears threatening. "Maddie, please, don't do this. We can fix it. We can fix us." She didn't flinch. "There is no us left to fix." He reached for her hand. She withdrew it. Security took him by the arms once more. For the first time, Brandon Carter understood what it felt like to lose not money, not status, but the last person who ever believed in him. And as he was dragged from the ballroom, Madeline turned to Adrian, because the next decision she made would reshape the entire company. While Brandon was escorted out in a storm of disgrace, the room's attention slowly shifted to the only other person whose presence now felt painfully out of place, Brielle. She sat rigid in her chair, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles blanched. Moments earlier, she had curled against Brandon like a queen beside her chosen king. Now she was a ghost in a red satin dress, trembling under the weight of consequences she had never imagined would find her. The CFO spoke first, voice colder than the marble beneath their feet. "Miss Monroe, regarding your involvement in the data, Leaks Legal will be contacting you within the next 48 hours. Difference." Brielle's breath hitched. "But I didn't mean to sabotage anything. I only sent what they asked for. I didn't know it was serious." Madeline looked at her with steady, almost pitying clarity. "You sold confidential files to a rival firm. That is serious by definition." Tears filled Brielle's eyes, mascara beginning to feather at the corners. "I did it for him. Brandon said he needed help." He said. Adrian cut in sharply. "You are responsible for your choices, not the excuses you hide behind." The words struck her like a slap. Executives whispered. Some shook their heads, disgusted. Others simply stared, as though realizing in real time just how far-reaching Brandon's corruption had become. Brielle pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. "But what happens to me now?" The board chairwoman answered with unflinching professionalism. "You will be banned from accessing any Carter Dynamics property effective immediately. A formal investigation will determine further legal consequences." Brielle's voice cracked into a broken whisper. "You're ruining my life." Madeline inhaled, calm yet decisive. "No, Brielle, you tried to ruin mine, and when that wasn't enough, you helped him ruin a company full of people who depended on stability. This is not punishment, it's accountability." More tears fell. She looked small now, stripped of the confidence she wielded like a weapon. "I thought he loved me," she whispered. Madeline's expression didn't harden, but it didn't soften either. "He doesn't know how to love anyone. Not you, not me, not even himself." A painful silence stretched between them. Security approached gently, not aggressive, not cruel, just performing their duty. "Miss Monroe, we need to escort you out." Brielle rose shakily. Her legs wobbled as she stepped away from the table, mascara smudged, lipstick fading, the illusion shattered. And though not one person reached out to her, not one voice offered comfort, the tragedy was unmistakable. She was another victim of Brandon's lies, except she had chosen to participate in them. Before stepping out the door, Brielle looked back at Madeline one last time, eyes glassy with regret. "I should have never underestimated you." Madeline held her gaze steadily. "Most people do." The ballroom had emptied out gradually, leaving behind the faint scent of champagne and tension. What remained was a smaller circle, the board, Adrian, the CFO, and Madeline standing taller than she ever had before. The board chairwoman approached her with a respectful nod. "Mrs. Carter, preparations are underway for tomorrow's announcement. The company will move forward under your direction." Dozer. For the first time all evening, Madeline allowed herself to breathe, not the careful shallow breaths she'd taken to survive the tension, but a full, unrestrained inhale. Freedom tasted unfamiliar. Sharp, clean. Adrian walked up beside her, his voice quieter now, stripped of the corporate polish. "You handled all of that with more grace than anyone I've ever seen." Madeline smiled softly, almost shyly. "It didn't feel graceful." "Strength rarely does," he replied. The warmth in his tone settled something deep inside her, a fracture long ignored, finally beginning to mend. But there was little time to bask in it. A new chapter awaited her. Hours later, in a private executive office overlooking Manhattan's skyline, Madeline stood before the floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights shimmered like 1,000 possibilities, reflections dancing across the glass. A leather-bound notebook, a fresh MacBook Pro, and the newly signed shareholder documents rested on the desk behind her, the tools of a woman stepping into the role she was always meant to fill. She wasn't the shadow anymore. She wasn't the quiet one. She wasn't the underestimated wife. She was the majority owner of Carter Dynamics. The hum of the city echoed her pulse, steady, certain. Adrian entered quietly, holding 2 cups of late-night coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said. She took the cup, fingers brushing his briefly. Warmth bloomed, subtle but undeniable. "Thank you," she said softly. He hesitated, then spoke with honest admiration. "Madeline, I hope you realize something. You didn't just save this company tonight. You saved your life from being defined by someone who never valued it." Her eyes glistened, not with pain, but with recognition. "I didn't save it," she murmured. "I reclaimed it." "I would, A silence settled between them, not heavy, but charged in a way neither dared disturb. Finally, Adrian cleared his throat. "Tomorrow will be intense. Cameras, press, shareholders, but you won't be alone." Her chest tightened, touched by the sincerity. "I know." He stepped closer, not invading, just close enough for the truth to exist plainly between them. "You're going to change everything," he said. Madeline looked out at the glittering skyline one more time. "No," she whispered. "I already have." And as the city pulsed below them, the next sunrise promised a final reckoning that would close this story once and for all. The next morning, the press lined up outside Carter Dynamics headquarters, the winter sun catching on camera lenses and polished marble. Reporters murmured in anticipation, waiting to see the woman whose name had exploded across every financial wire overnight. Inside, the atmosphere was completely different than the chaos of the previous evening. Calm, focused, respectful. Madeline walked through the glass doors in a tailored navy suit that fit her like armor, simple, elegant, powerful. Her steps were steady, unhurried. People turned as she passed, offering nods of acknowledgement. Not pity, not confusion. Recognition. In the main atrium, a podium waited for her. Adrian stood nearby, offering a quiet, reassuring nod. "You ready?" he asked. Madeline inhaled. "More than I ever thought possible. It's now the event." Cameras clicked as she approached the microphone. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice strong and clear. "Carter Dynamics is entering a new era, one built on transparency, accountability, and respect." She spoke of restructuring, of rebuilding trust, of valuing every employee from the ground up. No dramatics, no theatrics, just truth delivered with grace. It wasn't revenge. It was leadership. When the conference ended, applause filled the atrium, genuine, warm, and long overdue. As she stepped away, Adrian joined her. "You were extraordinary," he said. She smiled softly. "I was finally myself." They walked toward the exit together until a familiar voice broke the calm. "Madeline, please." Brandon stood by the revolving doors, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. He looked nothing like the man who once strutted through these halls with arrogance as his cologne. Security moved in, but Madeline raised a hand. "It's okay." He swallowed hard. "I lost everything last night. The board, my job, my reputation, and now, you." Madeline didn't respond immediately. She studied him, the man she once loved deeply, the man she grieved long before this moment. Finally she spoke. "You didn't lose me last night, Brandon. You lost me years ago, when you stopped valuing what we built." He blinked rapidly, tears threatening. "Is there any chance at all, that we could fix this someday?" Her heart didn't twist the way it once would have. She felt free. "No," she said gently, "but I hope you learn from this. Truly learn." Brandon nodded weakly, then stepped aside as security guided him out. No drama, no scene, just a quiet ending to a long-dying story. Madeline exhaled. Outside, the cold Manhattan air greeted her like a promise. Adrian offered his arm, not possessive, not demanding, simply present. She took it. As they walked into the sunlight, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "I didn't just survive, I became someone new." And for the first time in her life, the future finally felt like hers. So, that's where our story closes, my wonderful friends. You're still here with me, right? If you stayed until this moment, it means something in Madeline's journey touched your heart in a way you maybe didn't expect. And that matters. It really does. Because her story reminds us of a truth we often forget. We don't control what others do to us, but we always control how we rise afterward. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." And tonight, we watched a woman turn her deepest wound into the doorway of her strength. Maybe you've been underestimated. Maybe you've been hurt quietly, the way she was. But healing isn't grand or dramatic. Sometimes it's just choosing yourself again, even when it feels impossible. If this story made you feel seen, understood, or braver in any small way, let us know. Hit the like button so more people can find this message, share it with someone who needs strength tonight, and subscribe so you and I can keep walking through these stories together. Your heart matters here, and I'm glad you're still with me.